Hello, everyone. Siobhan here. It is week 42, and this week I'm going to talk about a phenomena that actually feels like, for many of us, it feels like we're waiting for our life to begin. And this is an experience that we'll feel most noticeably when we're kind of hanging out, lingering between the fourth stage of the process and moving into the first. And the reason for that is that the first stage of the process requires us to have total clarity on what it is we actually want. And when we have that clarity, the commitment follows naturally. Oftentimes, though, until we can really zero in on the thing that we want more than anything, we feel really confident in our clarity, we have no choice but to spend our time kind of flailing in the fourth stage of the process. And what that looks like will depend on, I guess, sort of the stories that are playing through our mind and how strong a hold the ego's perception of separateness has taken root in our consciousness. So if we start, first of all, with a dream or a desire that it feels impossible. It feels like, yeah, I really want that, but, and we hear the story going, as soon as we think about the dream or desire, there's like a whole long list of reasons why we can't have the thing that we want. So in the case of that type of dream or desire, there's a clear indication anytime we hear the voice in our head saying, yeah, but, I can't because, and there's a long list of reasons why, then we know that our consciousness, as it relates to that specific dream or desire, is still very much rooted in the ego's perception of it being separate, right? Separate from the consciousness that permeates the rest of the universe. So in that case, that'll be the kind of dream or desire that we might carry with us for a very long time, and it feels like we can never get the thing that we want. And during that process, the big challenge that we face is that the ego has kind of painted a picture of what the dream or desire looks like. And it's very clear. This is what it has to be. This is how it has to go. This is what it must look like. And these are the things that are required in order for me to be, do, have, or experience the thing that I want. The reason we have to spend so much time in the fourth stage of the process, and in this case, because the ego is firmly grasping onto this dream through the lens of separation, it means that when we're in the fourth stage of the process, we're really in the underworld. And the purpose of that is that being in the underworld, we have to divest ourselves of everything that reinforces that perception of separation. So in most cases, what that really means is we need to spend more time refining the dream or the desire. We've been talking about this in the community of practice a little bit, where we often, without realizing it, the ego sets up all kinds of conditions as ways of negotiating in order to maintain its identity of separateness. So that might look like, I can't do this until. And so the thing that we start pursuing is the thing that we think we need so that we can then be the person, have the experience, and do the things that we really want to do. And in that way, what ends up happening is it feels like we spend our whole life waiting to actually live the life that we want. Because we're constantly on this treadmill of pursuing something we don't even really want. But we're doing it because the ego has firmly convinced us that we must do this thing first before we can experience what it is that we really want. So ultimately what we really want is to be happy, right? We want to be joyful. We want to feel a sense of unobstructed freedom. We want to be able to express ourselves fully. We want rich, creative, colorful, meaningful lives, right? That's what we really want. But those are really abstract concepts for the ego, which are very difficult for it to kind of pin down and put into a little box and say, okay, this box is labeled writer, or this box is labeled actor, or this box is labeled producer, or this box is labeled builder, whatever it is, right? So these abstract things that are very much the domain of the soul, really go against the way that the ego tries to manage its need to maintain this sense of separateness, right? Like, the ego is constantly reinforcing this perception that it is separate. It sees itself as separate from all consciousness, right? That's why it reinforces the body is this physical barrier. The body is what separates me from you, the inside from the outside, belonging, not belonging, right? So it's constantly looking for ways to create barriers of definition or boundaries to contain this experience of separateness. And usually what it's going to do is it'll do that through identity. So it's still something somewhat malleable or almost elusive, but not quite as abstract as the realm in which the soul operates, which is really through feeling, through sensing, through texture, through color, through taste, through smell. The universe or the soul of the world is speaking to us in this very symbolic way, where whatever that we're experiencing is open to multiple interpretations. It can't be contained or defined in the way in which the ego wants to contain and define to make it known, right? Like the ego is always trying to take something and say, okay, here's a nice, neat little box. We're going to call that box a pear. Now we know what that is. Whereas the soul is going to communicate to us and say, okay, here's this thing and it's kind of green and sometimes it's hard and then it goes kind of orangey red and then it gets really soft and then it gets really brown, and it can still be a pear, but it can also be all these other things. So when we think about what our dreams and desires are, and we're trying to make that transition from the fourth stage to the first stage, we experience that transition in, I think, probably three different ways. The first one is it feels like an obstacle or a barrier we're constantly trying to cross. It's like when you see those obstacle courses that they put the Marines through where they've got to climb over the wall, they got to climb up it with a rope and then drop down on the other side. It's kind of like that. When we're operating from the ego's orientation and this perception of separateness, it feels like every time we think we are really clear about what it is we want, we've got to scale that wall and then drop down into a pile of mud on the other side. And then we start going through the process and we get to the third stage and we realize, actually, that's not really what I wanted because I'm not committed enough to do that. So what that might look like is, so in our community of practice, the example we had was being a writer and thinking that the desire was to be a writer in order to live a particular lifestyle. And so in order to do that, we have to earn enough money to be able to live that lifestyle. We have to do it as a writer. So there's all kinds of conditions that are already placed on that. So as we come up against that obstacle, transitioning from the fourth stage into the first stage, it feels like the obstacle we have to mount is I have to generate enough money and I have to do it being the writer in order to get over that wall. And then when I get over that wall, I'm going to travel through the three stages of the process that are going to bring me over to that threshold of the third and fourth stage of the process. And I'm going to get there and realize that this is the test of that commitment, right? So that threshold from the fourth stage into the third or first stage, that's the first time our commitment is tested. This is where we're really challenged to be clear about what it is we really want. And oftentimes that means belief systems and old stories and limited ways of being have to transform. We're challenging an old ego identity, right? An identity of ourselves that is still very much rooted in separateness. So we have to challenge this concept of ourselves and be willing to let go of that to step into a possibility in which we're no longer confined by this perception of separateness. Then we travel through the journey. We go into the second stage. We said, what would it be like for me to be a writer and make a living being a writer so that I could live the life that I really want? Notice that I said so that I can live the life that I really want. Being a writer has now become a means to an end. Being a writer is not actually what we want. What we want is to be a writer so we can live the life that we want. What we really want is to live that life. So the ego's already fucked with our head and has already said, oh, here, we'll insert writer as this like result, this outcome that we have to pursue. but it sets us up on this course of pursuit to never actually be satisfied, because being a writer is not actually what we want. Being a writer might be part of the lifestyle, but now we've set this up as this is the have to do thing. It's on my to-do list before I can be happy. So I have to wait to live my life until I can master this. So as we move through the second stage of the process, we enter into the third stage of the process. Now our commitment is challenged. We've been asking this question: what would it take for me to be a writer and make a living from my writing so that I can live the life that I really want to live? We get into the third stage of the process, and suddenly the soul of the world is starting to respond to the desire, and it's pursuing us with the things, the people, the resources, the opportunities and experiences that are going to allow us to create that reality. But now we're looking at those things and we're realizing, well, I don't really want to slave away at writing all the time. What I really want is to just live this life in the country where I get to live a really simple life and I spend some time writing. But now it feels like everything is about, now I have to labor away at trying to make my writing make money. So we realize in that moment, in the third stage of the process, that we're not actually willing to pursue the thing that is now pursuing us in response to the questions that we asked in the second stage of the process. So we're now at the third stage, fourth stage threshold, and that's the second time in which our commitment will be challenged. So the first time was when we crossed over that first obstacle. The desire, the soul of the world says, okay, if this is what you really want, keep pursuing this. If you pursue this, it'll pursue you. So we challenge that commitment and we say, I'm not willing to live as this separate self anymore. But when we get to the threshold of the fourth stage of the process, after going through the third stage, and we realize this isn't actually how I want to spend my time. I really want to spend my time doing X, Y, and Z. So we have no choice but to end up back into the fourth stage of the process because we haven't been willing to affirm that commitment. So even though clarity and commitment is the task of the first stage of the process, it's very much a requirement of the third stage for us to reaffirm, to recommit to whatever it is that we set out to pursue as our dream or desire in the first stage of the process. So that's one way that we kind of go through the obstacle course. Another way that we'll go through it is we have a dream or a desire, but it feels like instead of it being fraught with all kinds of conscious awareness of the struggle and the hard work that's required to achieve what we want, instead the dream or desire feels very authentic and real or true for us, but it also just feels like unrealistic. We just can't really buy into it. We're just like, instead of the ego going to town trying to figure out how to make it work and then setting up all these obstacles that we have to jump over in order to achieve the result we think we want, it's like the ego's just like, yeah, that's just not even a possibility. And so we never really think about that as a legitimate option or as a dream or desire. So what's happening in that case is we're taking the dream or desire and saying, well, it's not that I don't want to pursue this, it's just that I can't do it right now. So in this way, we're again putting our life off. We're waiting to live our life. We push the dream or desire out into the future. And it's sort of like we just keep pushing it down the road. It's like, well, I really want to do that, but I'm not ready to do it now, maybe in 5 years. So I'll just hold it out here in this kind of nebulous space down the road somewhere. So we might think about that in terms of like, well, I want to have children, but not right now. I want to buy a house, but not right now. I want to be a writer, but not right now. And so we kind of push it off into the distance. So those dreams or desires, they sort of, they kind of sit in a little gestation or incubation space. It's almost like some dreams or desires, what they'll require of us, who we will be required to become in order to live them, need more time. And on some level, we know that. It's like when I was in my 20s, I always assumed that I would have children. But then when I was in my 30s, I realized, I guess if I'm going to have children, I should think about that. And then by the time I hit my 40s, it was like, you know, even if I was going to have children, I really don't want to be changing diapers and staying up all night. Like, I really like my lifestyle the way that it is right now. And I don't think I'm really ready to give that up. So that was kind of like something that I just assumed was a dream or a desire that I pushed into the future. But then periodically I'd check in with that dream and realize maybe this isn't really my dream. Maybe this is actually a collective dream, and I just assumed that it was going to be mine as well. I just inherited that dream because that's what everyone else did. That's what women did. That's what the women in my family did, right? So in that way, a dream or a desire that goes off into the distance, we can have sort of two relationships with it. One is that it needs to be distanced from us because we're not totally sure that it's actually our dream. So we need to kind of keep it at arm's length where we can kind of daydream about it. I call it future tripping, when we're kind of fantasizing about the life that we want to live. That's where we place those dreams a lot of the time. And then the other thing that happens is that we place them off into the distance because we need more time to actually become the person that's capable of living them. And so they never really go away, and they never really get questioned as not being authentic or our own. They just kind of sit there. So I remember a long time ago, probably in my early 30s, thinking to myself that at some point, I want to live on a piece of land. I assumed that I would be married and had kids. And I thought to myself, I want to have a cabin out on the back 40 of the property. And that'll be my cabin. That'll be the place that I go when I'm having my period. And I'll go out there and I'll spend a few days in the woods and I'll just be alone. And it felt really important to me to have that because I assumed that one of my children would be a daughter. And it would be important to role model to her need to take space, her need to have a place of her own that she could go to. Well, I never had children, but years later, when John and I reconnected, one of the first things that we talked about was, I was still living in Toronto and he was living here in Knoxville, and he's like, well, what are your dreams? And I said, well, I don't know. I was like, I always figured this is what my life would look like, And his response was like, well, can't you build that cabin here in Tennessee? And at that time, I kind of thought, well, I guess I could, but I was sort of like, but I don't want to. I don't want to leave Toronto and move to Tennessee. I was very resistant. I wasn't willing to surrender to the way in which the soul of the world was presenting this opportunity to fulfill this dream or desire for me. So, here we are a few years later, and dreams like that are starting to manifest, dreams that I never really gave much time or attention to. I just kind of held them out there in the ethers. I sort of, what I would call, nurtured them with my longing. And in this way, we're often calling our dreams and our desires to us through a sense of unexpressed longing. So we have dreams that we vocally talk about a lot. We talk about how I want to move to a bigger house. I want to move to another country. I want to get a different job. I want to quit doing what I'm doing, right? We talk about those things. A lot of the time, though, what we're talking about is all the reasons why we can't have the thing that we want. Instead of investing all that emotional, creative energy in painting a picture of the things that we really want, we're actually doing the opposite. We're painting a picture of our self-doubt, of our worry, of our skeptical ideas of like, well, it's just not possible. It's not going to happen for me. And so we keep ourselves kind of standing at the bottom of that obstacle, that first obstacle. We never even cross it. We feel like, many times we feel like as if life is happening over there on the other side of the obstacle and we're trapped in the fourth stage of the process. And there's some force that's exerting itself over us that's preventing us from climbing over that obstacle, when in fact, it's just us using our creative energy to vocalize the experience of our concerns and our worries that are really just a reflection of the ego's perception of our separateness. So if we can bring ourselves back to that awareness that we're not separate, if we know that is our sort of guiding truth at all times, there's no need to use our creative energy to continuously reinforce a story that we know is not true. So while all of this kind of like noisy, active, creative energy is expressing itself over here, there's this silent longing that's coming from the heart. That's the soul. And it's the soul like in vibrational resonance to the longing of the supply to fulfill the desire that we hold. Remember, all desires in response to the longing of the supply that yearns to fulfill it. So for example, when I'm silently emitting this desire to have a piece of property with a cabin on the back 40, there's somewhere else in the universe a longing that wants to fulfill that desire. So in this case, that's maybe what brought John and I together for that purpose. I don't know. We don't have the children, and we haven't built the cabin on the back 40 yet, but there's a possibility there, right? So we have this kind of outer display of creative energy that's very vocal, and it's demonstrative and demanding, and it's often, for lack of a better way of describing it, negative, right? But then we also have this silent yearning or longing that it's without any agenda, I guess is what I would say, and it's without any interpretation or spin. There is no good or bad because it doesn't exist within the duality of separation that's created by the ego. In the duality of separation, everything is either good or bad. It's either working out for me or it's not. It's either high vibe or totally bad negative energy, right? But the longing that expresses itself from the heart, which is how the soul operates in the world, it's beyond duality, right? Non-dual awareness doesn't see anything as good or bad, either or, past, present, or future. It's just longing, right? So there is this part of us that is the soul's consciousness, right? This is the higher part of ourselves, the part that encompasses the duality of who we are as well. And that longing is just continuously expressing itself. It's a little bit like a lighthouse. It's just kind of a beacon emitting a frequency into the ethers. So really what we're trying to do with all of the practices that we work with around the process, specifically movement and art making, is we're trying to cultivate our capacity to tune in to that frequency of the soul's longing. That the more time we spend doing things that allow us to relate to, connect to, amplify, and also just have a conscious awareness, spending more time in what we might call the seat of the soul, the more we're able to effortlessly and easily attract to us the longing of the supply that wants to fulfill our desires effortlessly and easily. So we're spending a lot less time being demonstrative and angry and complaining and justifying and giving all kinds of excuses as to why we can't go live the life in the country that we want to live now, because first we have to be a writer, and to be a writer we have to make enough money so that we can do all these things. And in essence, we're waiting to live the life that we really want. So the soul is always trying to orient us to what is it that you really want. And oftentimes the soul is referred to in most writing as the still, small, silent voice within. And the reason for that is that the ego is always kind of having a temper tantrum, right? Like when we hear the voice in our head, it's always the ego, because it's always speaking up. It's always shouting the loudest. It's always like waving the banners and getting our attention, right? But the soul is whispering very softly. And so a lot of the time, we're not even going to know what the soul really wants unless we sort of remove ourselves from our day-to-day activities. That's why things like meditation are really helpful, or contemplative walking in the woods or being in nature, because it gives us an opportunity to kind of turn down the volume on that incessant reel that's playing in our mind of the ego, so that we can actually connect to that longing. It's like, yeah, I've had that longing for a long time. And even though my life has changed and at different points, maybe I wanted different things, there was this thing that was constant. And the thing that was constant was like, I want a place of my own where I can create. And so maybe the dream or the desire gets sort of shaped and molded. Maybe my original dream or desire of the cabin on the back 40 related to being in a space and being able to demonstrate to my daughter that it's important that a woman have a space of her own. But maybe now, as a woman who's about to be 50 and I don't have children, it's about I just need a space of my own where I can go, where I can create, where it can be all my stuff, especially if I'm living a life in which, you know, my life is in contact with others, whether that's in community or through family or whatever way that might show up. So there's a third way in which we kind of experience our dreams and our desires, and that's the moment when the dream or desire that has been a longing, it's a dream or desire that is rooted in the soul's orientation. It's not something that the ego is making a big story and a problem out of, but it's also not way out there in the distance. It's something that maybe was in the distance for a long time, but somehow it started to get closer and closer and closer to who we were. And the way in which we pull that dream or desire that's out there in the distance closer to us is in the third stage of the process. In the third stage, we're pursuing that which we want to pursue us. So if we use the example of this cabin on the back 40, initially when I saw myself in that cabin, I didn't really see myself doing anything. I just saw it as it's an important thing for me to have a space of my own, and it's important for me to demonstrate to my daughter that she needs a space of her own. But I wasn't really doing anything in it. So now as my life has shifted and changed and I don't have children and I'm, you know, experiencing different things now than I was 20, 30 years ago, when I think about having a space of my own, there's still a longing. There's still a pull or a draw to that. But it's very clear to me what I see myself doing in that space. In that space that is my own, I see myself creating. I see myself painting large canvases. I see myself being able to just explore my own interior landscape and the way in which I might express that through a variety of mediums. So it's essentially a studio. So in the third stage of the process, if my longing is to have a studio, a space of my own in which I can create, I can just leave everything out and keep it messy all the time and go into that space at any time and know that it's my own, it's my space to create in. Then the third stage of the process calls me to pursue that. It calls me to move towards the thing that I want. So even though this is a dream or a desire that's been off here in the distance for a long time, without me even really making the association that maybe the thing I want now is actually a variation or an iteration of a previous dream or desire, something that I've held a longing for a long time. And because I've held a longing for it for a long time, it means it has a very strong connection. It's like instead of that being like just a little thin wisp of a connection, it's like that connection is very strong because I've been reinforcing that connection like day after day, month after month, year after year for many years. So that connection is very strong, and to be able to pull myself towards that, all I need to do is to take some simple actions to move towards it. Simple actions might be things like verbalizing that what I would like more than anything is a studio space of my own, to just speak those words out loud. Moving towards it might be starting to imagine, like, what would that space actually look like inside, and seeing myself doing the things that I really want to be doing. Moving towards it might be starting to prepare myself in terms of gathering up my supplies and kind of making a space in the space that I already have so that when there is a building for me to move that into, everything's ready to just go into that space. So in this way, what happens is we start to live the life today that we've dreamed of living down the road. So we don't let the current circumstances or appearance of limited resources or opportunities or knowledge or skill to prevent us from actually doing the thing that we want to do now. If what I want is to paint, then today I paint. I don't worry if I don't have a studio, I just paint because that's what I see myself doing in the studio. In that way, what ends up happening is in the third stage of the process, I've actually started to pursue the thing that I want to pursue me. So because I'm not thinking about it, it's way over there, and what am I going to do to get to it, and all these obstacles that I have to cross, or I have to keep pushing it away, I've let go of time as a barrier, because time is a construct of the ego, not of the soul. When time is no longer a barrier, I'm just busy doing the thing that I want to do right now. I'm being the person that I want to be right now. I'm living the life that I want to live right now. And in that, I've transformed myself into the woman that's capable of living the dream or desire that I want to bring into reality. So in that way, that's how we collapse time. Time collapses, and before we know it, effortlessly and easily, the people, resources, opportunities, and experiences that are required for us to realize that dream just begin to flood into our field of awareness. And because we're already doing the thing that we wanted to do, we don't even hesitate. We don't make up any reasons why, oh, well, it's not safe, or I shouldn't do that. That's a big risk. We just say yes. We say yes to the opportunity to have a space available to do the things that we want to do. We say yes to what we want more of in our lives without having to qualify it or justify it or worry about, can I sustain it? We just know that we'll cross that road when we get to it if things are going to change. Because now we're in the process of allowing life to unfold, one desire after another. So your call to action this week, I want you to think about a particular dream or a desire, and to take that particular dream or desire and try to figure out, like, is this a dream or desire that you're just standing at that wall at the first stage and you're trying to figure out how to get over the wall? Or is it a dream or desire that's been pushed off into the distance and you just keep saying it has to stay out there? Or are you somewhere in between those two where it's like it's something that's been out here in the distance, but you're realizing that it's actually sort of shapeshifted, and you're starting to see the ways in which you can actually embody the dream and pursue what you want now? And then let us know what that dream is. Because, of course, as soon as you give voice to a dream, you're eliciting the response of the universe, right? The soul of the world is going to pursue you with that which you pursue. And the mere speaking of that, the writing of that, the communicating of your dream or desire is a movement towards it. Okay, looking forward to hearing about your dreams.